everybody, this is Rebel Heart Rose. Let me get this little one over here because I'm going to introduce you to one of my kittens. Uh, how are y'all doing? We'll get to the book, trust me. I'm just being a little bit. I'm trying to fish a kitten. Come on, Deanie. Come on, Deanie. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And this is Houdini. Don't camera shy now. This is one of my fur babies I'm trying to take care of. She's spunky. She lives up to her name. She very much lives up to her name. Why don't we get that? Does that help? Does that help, girl? Yeah, that helps. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do chapter 3. No, Xena. The warrior princess. And I might put her back on the bed. But just know that she's here. She's in the room. And he's a little cutie pie. Mm-hmm. She fits the name Houdini because she knows how to escape a room fast. She's very quick on her feet. And she can jump. Yeah. I was going to name her Dinah, like Alice's kitty, Dinah. This one, Houdini, seems to fit better. It does. Okay, but I'll let her stay on my bed. On the terms that she behaves. I'm going to turn this back on. It's hot in here. Whew. I wonder how all y'all are doing. Yeah, this is supposed to have been tied, but the little darling had her way with it. Okay, this chapter is called When They Bear Gifts. And it's, I think, Diane Duane wrote it. It was 3 hours after sunrise, somewhere in the western lands of Dacia, and the sun spilled down from behind the 3 of them into the valley toward which today's road led, laying their shadows out long against the white dust. And when the road curved against the green gold of the fields of ripening wheat to either side to either side. Ahead of Gabriel strode a figure a few people ever got to see. A warrior naturally at ease for once, lazy, almost unfocused, even chewing idly on a blade of grass, her dark hair swinging a little with her stride and shining in the sun. Behind Xena on the long rein, the golden mare Argo ambled along, trying to snatch bites of greenery from the roadside as they went. and occasionally succeeding. Gabrielle breathed out in pleasure at the absolute peace of it all as she walked. High up, larks were singing against a sky of cool deep blue, one which would later be a hot deep blue. If she was any judge of the weather, as they walked, Gabrielle was already eyeing the landscape for possible shade and finding it here and there, even this high up, where outcroppings of old trees reared up, scattered among the corn lands on either side. Down ahead of them, as the road descended into the vale, the greenery grew thicker, less scattered, combining into a genuine forest. And in the midst of the forest, maybe 8 or 10 miles distant, she thought she caught the occasional glimpse of one or two tall stone buildings. What they might be, she wasn't sure. But Xena didn't look even slightly concerned, which was always a good sign. The rolling countryside around them was delightful, and much more so since Gabrielle knew that it was now a lot safer than it had been when she and Xena had first arrived in these parts. No one wants to have to live in the neighborhood of a chimera, but when the things suddenly change, their hunting grounds in spring, anyone might suddenly find a creature with a lion's front, goat's middle, and a snake's tail, holed up in one of the local caves, setting things on fire with its inflammable halitosis and eating the livestock. So it had been with Malia, the little village she and Xena had left yesterday. Xena had predictably enough been begged to help do away with the creature, which had already killed the two village hunters who had tried to take it on. The ensuing hunt had taken the better part of a day and night, but the outcome had never been in doubt. Chimera were not all that intelligent, and when the beaters, Gabrielle leading them, drove the Chimera into the narrow gully where Xena was waiting for it, everything was over in a few minutes and the flash of a chakram. Now at least there were no more other creatures within a 50-mile radius, and everyone could relax. Xena, ahead of Gabrielle, glanced toward a coppice of trees that stood close to the road, about 50 paces ahead of them. Thinking of stopping? Gabrielle said. She watched Xena glance down toward the forested vale as they walked. It was rare to see her companion this relaxed, but even a woman so driven had to let up on herself sometimes or go mad. And this was apparently one of those times. Argo wandered past Xena, her ears pricked up, her attention apparently on one down hanging branch. Maybe, Xena said, her voice sounding lazy. It's not as if we're expected anywhere. Under the tree, something rustled. Xena stopped still, her hand on her chakram, and Argo kept on heading for the tree, making a soft, whickering noise in her throat. Gabrielle gripped her staff, brought it up to the ready. Something scrambled up out of the underbrush, or rather, someone, and Gabrielle groaned softly at the sight of him. He looked as usual like a Collision between a delivery cart from Joe's discount armorers of Corinth and an unmade couch. The earnest face, the slightly gawky form, the battered mismatched gear and weaponry, the general air of being unready for anything. They were all too familiar. Fear nothing, he said as he scrambled to his feet, brushing off various leaves, twigs, and opportunistic bugs. Druxer the Mighty is here. Xena relaxed again and rolled her eyes expressively. I suppose we all have to be somewhere. Gabrielle raised her eyebrows, but lowered her staff to lean on it, and paused where next to Xena in the road. Just how did you know we would be coming this way? She said. Easy. I simply followed the sound of triumph. Shouting crowds, maidens throwing flowers, the usual. Xena threw Gabrielle a dry glance. I've got to try to get them to make less noise throwing those flowers. Then I took a shortcut across the fields last night and had a nap here. He scratched himself reflectively. So where are you two headed now? Off for a few days, peace and quiet, Gabrielle said, in private. Though now there seemed precious little chance of that. Did I really think it was going to stay quiet for a little while? Gabriel thought. So much for that. Joxer's presence never made for a quiet life, especially for her. Well, never fear. I shall come with you, Joxer announced in a heroically magnanimous tone of voice, and protect you. The look Xena threw him was choice. Even Joxer's ego had to take note of it, and said, Well, at night, anyway. I can share the watches with you. Xena chuckled. Oh no, Gabrielle, Xena said. If he's offering, why not? You were the one who was complaining last week about 4-hour watches that never let either of us get enough sleep. But there was something slightly wicked in Xena's expression, an almost provocative laziness. Let him share our road for a couple of days, she said. It's safe enough around here. What's the harm in that? And suddenly Gabrielle understood the expression. And if he gets too intolerable, then one night when he's asleep somewhere safe, we'll slip away on business. We've done it before. Gabrielle raised her eyebrows. Xena must really be in a good mood, otherwise she wouldn't be suggesting this. And who am I to ruin her mood when it's good for a change? She breathed out. All right, Gabriel said, but one thing, Joxer. Anything. No singing, he pouted. Gabriel scowled at him. All right, Joxer said at last, disappointed. But there are 19 more verses of the Ballad of Joxer the Mighty since I saw you last. You're missing out on some great material. I'm sure we are, and doubtless posterity will judge me harshly, Xena said. Meanwhile, let's get going. Argo reached up to tear off a mouthful of leaves from the nearest tree and then stepped out behind Xena. Joxer and Gabrielle followed. They walked on down the dusty white road, looking out across the countryside. An astonishing, fertile and gentle-looking land set among the little low hills. Joxer looked out over the rolling waves of gold green and said, This looks like a pretty well kept place. It's one of the little kingdoms between the Empire and the city states, Xena said. Illyria, its name is. If I remember correctly, I didn't know there were kings around here, said Joxer. Well, there's one here, all right, Xena said. King Anameus, and he doesn't have the most wonderful reputation. Gabrielle raised her eyebrows, noting that Xena didn't look terribly concerned, even as she made this pronouncement. Really? The name's slightly familiar, but I don't remember hearing anything all that bad about him. Oh, apparently he was all right, Selena said, until some years back. He married one of the local princesses, and they were happy together, but then there was a child, and the queen died. And after that, there were rumors of trouble. What kind of trouble? Xena shook her head. Gods, I don't know. But you hear all kinds of stories, and how likely they are to be genuine, or just rumors. Started by annoyed neighbors is always the question. She raised her eyebrows. He had a good name as a warrior, and Emmaus did. When he had cause to go abroad, but apparently at home, he started to acquire a reputation for enforcing the country's laws more rigorously than he needed to. A real stickler for the rules, not a position calculated to make your subjects particularly enjoy your rule. Huh? Gabriel said. Is he oppressing his people? Joxer said eagerly. Should he be deposed? Xena rolled her eyes. Don't start, she said. Certainly not without evidence, Gabriel said. Hey, that's it, she thought. Maybe we can get him to go ahead and gather evidence and then slip off some other way while he's doing it. But that was no good. Joxer was certain to get himself in some kind of trouble, and it would be Xena and Gabrielle who were responsible for it. Then they would have to get him out of it again. Simpler to just let matters take their course. Well, Joshua said, maybe we should look the situation over as responsible heroes, I mean. Maybe, Xena said. We should mind our own business until we have reason to do otherwise. Hmm? She walked on ahead. Gabriel threw Joxer a you stay here look and hurried a little to catch up with Xena. When she did, Xena was smiling. What are you thinking of, Gabriel? What are you thinking of? Gabrielle said under her breath. Nothing in particular, Xena said, except what I was thinking about before we were so rudely interrupted. Stopping for a mid-morning snack. For Argo, if not for us. She gazed ahead of them. That glade up there. It looks like a good spot. There's water there. If I'm reading the terrain right, one of the little streams that leads down into the valley. I meant, Gabriel said, what are you thinking of as regards him? She gestured with her head at the young man following them. That smile got lazier. Gabriel, you of all people should know how he is. Run away, he just chases you faster. Slow down, pay no attention to Joxer, and he gets bored, and he goes elsewhere. Not after creating a lot of trouble first. Less than if you run, and I don't mean like running anywhere today, and I don't feel like running anywhere today. Nothing urgent is happening. Let's take it easy for a change. We'll be rid of him soon enough. Easy for you to say, Gabriel muttered, but Xena was already ahead of her again. making for the glade, and Gabriel followed, while behind her, examined every shadow came Joxer. Gabriel sighed and tried to start enjoying the morning again. It was futile, for behind her, someone was starting to hum. Joxer! The humming stopped. Gabriel sighed and kept walking. The glade did indeed have a brooklet running through it, one of several that would their way down, of several that wound their way down from the hills on this side of the valley. A little mossy pool lay among the roots of the big, smooth trunked beech trees there, where the trunks of older, fallen trees lay as well, and Argo waded down to stand fetlock deep in the clear, rippling water, sucking it up for minute after minute without stopping. After a good while, she moved to settle down to some serious grazing by the banks of the stream above the pool, and Xena went to her to undo the cinch and lift her saddle off. Joxer was poking around among the huge holes of the trees, looking impatient, and the sight made Gabrielle immediately feel like sitting down and relaxing, if only to irk him as she did so, and started going through her pouch to see if there was one more piece of nut bread left from the last baking. Joxer came out from around another tree and looked over at Xena. How long are you planning to stay here? Xena strolled over to where Gabrielle sat and took the piece of nut bread she held up for her. Argo needs to eat. Even I need to eat. What's your hurry? There are deeds to be doing, he muttered. They'll get done, believe me, Xena said. Half an hour's rest now won't make that much of a difference, and you may be glad of it later. Joxer made an impatient face and vanished behind one of the largest trees, downslope. Gabriel and Xena watched him go. Gabriel raised her eyebrows, saying, How far do you think he really followed us? There's no telling with that one, Xena said and sighed. Maybe it was really only since Malaya, behind them. Argo whinnied softly. Xena looked around to make sure her reins hadn't slipped down so that she could step on them, a favorite habit of hers. Maybe she stopped. Gabrielle, chewing on a mouthful of bread, glanced at Xena, saw her shocked look, followed her glance, and stopped chewing. On a log near the pond, dangling her perfect toes in the water, sat an extremely beautiful woman with long, wavy cascades of golden hair. All she wore, besides that splendid mane of hair, was a very scanty band of some glittering material around her chest, and another one around and below her hips. The air around her was sparkling slightly, the sparks falling gently to the surface of the water, where they skated around briefly before vanishing. Aphrodite, Xena said softly, very eye-catching. The goddess of love and beauty smiled charmingly. Just my divinity showing, she said. Gabriel probably considered that there was a whole lot more showing than just divinity. Oh, Xena said. Funny. Aries never seems to feel it necessary to indulge in that kind of display. Aphrodite rolled her eyes, annoyed. I do not wish to discuss my ex. Gabriel's eyebrows went up. You mean it's true? That story that he never did have any discretion, Aphrodite said, sounding exasperated. He would come around the house while he thought Hephaestus was at the shop. Well, somebody tattled, actually Apollo. You just cannot keep that one from looking in people's windows. She let out an annoyed breath. And then we got caught together, and there was a big scene. And why shouldn't there have been? You and Hephaestus were married. There's a word for that kind of thing, Gabriel said severely. Yeah, youthful indiscretion, said the goddess of love, and gave her a deadly look. Gabriel had been thinking of another word like adultery, but for the moment she decided to let it pass, especially considering the expression on Aphrodite's face. Anyway, since then I've been trying to get out of the house more, the goddess said. Do a little community service work on the side. "Ah," said Gabriel, somehow unconvinced that this was necessarily a good thing. "But enough about you," Xena said. "Exactly what have we done to deserve this little visit?" The goddess looked at Xena with amusement. "You always think everything that happens is aimed at you, don't you? Believe it or not, there are more things of interest in this neighborhood at the moment than just your august presence." Gabriel and Xena glanced at each other. "Such as?" said Xena. "Oh," Aphrodite smiled. "A small matter which requires the attention of a hero. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious? We're supposed to believe that," Gabriel said. "Since when do gods lower themselves to fib to mortals?" Aphrodite said, and pouted prettily. "I would have thought you'd appreciate it when I came to do you a favor." "Yes, well, I fear the gods even when they bear great gifts," Gabriel said a lot more dryly than was probably necessary. "Boy, and to think that they say boy, and to think they say that the aphorism is a dead art form," Aphrodite said. "Thanks for sharing, Miss Bu- Buxom, Bard of 380 BC. Gabriel looked bemused. "What's a BC?" "Don't go there," Aphrodite muttered in a warning tone of voice. "I wish I didn't have to." "Excuse me, but exactly what kind of favor do you have in mind, goddess?" Xena said. "As Gabriel says, the gods' favors rarely come without strings attached." "Well," Aphrodite glanced around her. "Joxer?" "You're interested in Joxer?" Gabriel said. "Things must be pretty slow up on Olympus this week." The goddess's look was wry. It was not the response that Gabriel had expected. "He might need some help shortly, that's all," she said. "Keep your eyes open." "What kind of help?" said Xena. "Your heroes," Aphrodite said fretfully. "That's your specialty, isn't it? Problem solving? Just deal with it." She started to go transparent. "With what?" Gabriel said. "The princess." "What princess?" But it was too late. In a fizz of hot pink light, the goddess was gone. Gabriel and Xena looked at each other. From nothing among the trees, they could hear someone humming. "Joxer?" Gabriel whispered. "A princess?" Xena whispered back. "Dum dum tiddly dum dum." Juxter the Mighty went down to the truck, sir, Xena and Gabriel said in unison. A sudden silence fell, broken by some desultory splashing in the stream that ran downslope from the pool. I remember you mentioning, Gabriel said, that Emmaus had a child, a daughter. Xena went over to Argo, who had gone back to grazing, and lifted her saddle from the log over which she had draped it. Argo gave her a reproachful look. I'm not sure Aphrodite's doing us any favors, Xena said as she saddled the mare again. Sounds more like she wants us to do her one. But either way, when she turns up, I start to get cautious. She swung up onto Argo's back. Let's get moving, but let's stop in the next village before Emmaus's main town and find out what's going on before we just walk into something we could otherwise avoid. She rode gently out of the glade, and Gabriel went after her, while behind her Joxer said, Hey, where's everybody going? Are we leaving? Hey, wait for me. It took only an hour and a half or so for them to reach the village at the end of the forest, at the edge of the forest, beside the road where it dove into the woods, about 6 miles before Animaeus's castle. The village called Tight was a comfortable enough place made up of 15 or 16 wattle and daub houses, tightly and neatly roofed with wheat straw thatch. The people there were well dressed for country folk and well fed, not one but two huge communal baked ovens stood outside the village on the woodland side with big stores of firewood stored nearby, held neatly stacked in thatched open-sided sheds. The people there had heard of Xena and made her and Gabriel very welcome, but Gabriel saw them spare some odd looks for Joxer, expressions of alarm or concern. Uh-oh. Stay for dinner, said the village head woman, a handsome, tall brunette named Demis. A fire was kindled in the middle of the village circle, and Gabriel and Xena and the villagers sat around it until fairly late in the evening, telling and hearing news of the countries round about, while dining on fresh bread and roast venison, and drinking the good, rough country wine. But the only news they seemed reluctant to discuss was that of Emmaus's little kingdom, which was odd since they were a part of it. As people began to drift away from the fire and back to their houses later in the evening, Xena took the opportunity to press the subject a little more with Demas. We are going to the castle in the morning, she said, if only to look around. Demas threw an uneasy glance at Joxer, who was busying himself with the remains of a chunk of venison. The king, Demas said, is a good man, if a little abrasive, but he is, shall we say, a little vigorous about law enforcement. That hardly seems like a bad thing, Gabriel said. The land is peaceful. You're a fairly prosperous folk. Yes, that's true, but there's no light but lacks its shadow. Her eyes were resting on Joxer, rather sadly now. The castle is probably safe enough for the two of you, but Gabriel followed the glance. He's not likely to leave us at this point, she said. What's the matter? Demis looked back at her. The expression was nervous. I've said too much already, she said. If the king should hear, she sighed. If you must stay, don't stay too long. It would be unfortunate for your young friend. Why? Demis shook her head. It's forbidden to speak of it, she said, but keep him out of there. She got up and made her way to her own house rather hurriedly. We could avoid it, Gabriel said. Xena thought about that, then shook her head. First of all, she said, my curiosity's been aroused. But secondly, I have a feeling that with or without us, Joxer's likely to wind up there. And if he does and gets in trouble, as Aphrodite suggested he might, Xena nodded. We'll go there briefly and keep an eye on him. She said it's all we can do. Late that night, Joxer was still unable to get to sleep. He went out to the low burning fire and sat there for a long time by himself under the stars of the early summer night, singing very softly in what he had been told often enough and now knew was no known mortal key. It was one of the many minor pains of his life. Inside his head, he always knew what his voice sounded like: pure, strong, clear, absolutely indicative of his mood, sad or glad, tender or reflective, and effortlessly so a voice that would win all hearers to its agenda. Unfortunately, this perception was nothing like the reality. The fates were winding off the distaff for him. But day after day, the thread of his life unreeled. Only a singing voice that made human beings run away. Even sheep and goats on lonely hillsides left for other hillsides lonelier still when they heard him sing. Joxer's heart had perfect pitch, but his throat had only the crow's voice, as rusty as the morning after the fox made it drop the cheese. People asked him to sing only when it was a slow midweek night at the tavern and they badly needed a laugh. He bore this without too much complaint, as he bore most of the other disappointments in his life, which were ongoing and without foreseeable resolution, until Atropos should come along with the big sharp shears and put an end to it all. He glanced over at the little thatched house in which he knew Gabriel lay asleep, and heaved a big sigh, secure in the knowledge that no one would hear it, and no one would care, not even her. From the other side of the fire, a voice said softly, "Tell me about it." "She is," he said very low, "kind of spectacular." "Kind of?" "Oh, more than that. She's the top. She's the Phoenix's pajamas. She's the top. She's—" "Cut it out already," Aphrodite said, but she said it affectionately. "You think I haven't heard it 100 times?" Joshua stared at her. He could hardly avoid it. The goddess suddenly sitting there across the fire from him was wearing a kind of clothing he had never seen. Nothing like a peplum or a chitin, chitin, but something that shone almost metallically in the firelight, fitted her all over from neck to ankles extremely closely and seemed to hug all her charms in an unusual, candid manner. The garment was also excessively pink, not a normal color for clothes in these parts. "Where did you come from?" Jockster said. "Take a wild guess. Mountain? Starts with the letter Omicron. Oh, do you like the spandex?" Jockster blinked and broke the stare by an act of will. "I haven't seen any of them hereabouts," he said. "But maybe the Chimera scared them away." Aphrodite looked at him kindly. "You really were left holding the empty, and for the morning they gave out the cognitive faculties, weren't you? Never mind. Mighty goddess! Now there's a boy who knows how to speak, to ask politely. Who says flirting is a dead art? I was just wondering if—" He looked over at the house in which Gabrielle lay. "If you couldn't, not today. I've got another job on my mind. And if there's one thing you learn fast in this business, it's never to multitask." Aphrodite said, "Big career mistake for a god. You do that. Pretty soon mortals start getting the idea that you're omnipotent. And then where are you? Answering prayers all hours of the day and night. Not a moment for yourself to have a bath or read a good scroll on the—" She made a face. "Never mind. There is, however, one thing you can do for me, and I would be really grateful." Aphrodite wiggled her eyebrows at him several times in a most suggestive manner. "What? How would you like to win a princess's heart?" Drexler burst out laughing. "That'll never happen." "How do you know?" Aphrodite said. "The world is full of unexpected occurrences." "Me? And a princess?" Drexler laughed harder and had to undo his blanket so that he could wipe his eyes. "Look at me. I'm a penniless, inter- itinerant warrior of no particular lineage. Princesses like stability, nobility, cash," he added with the wistful tone of someone who had not seen a lot of that commodity recently. "There's absolutely nothing about me to attract a princess. You might be surprised." "Cruel," Joxer said, looking up at the stars. "Cruel goddess, to raise a poor mortal's hopes. Here I sit alone, ever rejected and spurned, and you descend from cloudy Olympus to torment me. You could really get on my nerves," Aphrodite said. "If I wasn't so good-natured. Now stop whining and giving me weather reports, and pay attention. When it happens, I want you to do one thing." "When what happens?" "I knock on the amphora and it is empty." "Empty," the goddess said to herself. "I don't know why I bother. Well, yes, I do, but oh, what I go through to get anything done. Listen, you. I did not rise from the foam to play 20 questions with mortals. So just take my advice. When she asks you your name, don't tell her. Stall. Stall? Stall. Make her guess. Got that? Do I have to carve you a bas relief? No? Good. You do that. And after that, just follow your hunches and everything will turn out all right. She disappeared. It doesn't sound right somehow, Doctor said, uncertain. I thought the gods helped those who helped themselves. Believe me, this is the same thing, said her voice out of the air and nothing more. In the morning, no more than 2 hours leisurely walk brought them from Tyche to the walls of King Enomaus's forest castle. It was not a huge edifice, but handsome enough, a four-square walled building with towers at the corner and a single central keep. There was a cluster of thatched wooden houses in the shadow of the walls, and a small marketplace in the center of them. Stalls were set up there, and people moved casually among them, doing their shopping. Xena tied Argo up at a handy water trough fed by one of the forest streams and looked at the place over. Defensible, she said, looking at the dry moat which had which had been dug around the castle and was filled with sharpened stakes. A nice location. A noble edifice, Joxer said. Gabriel nodded absently, for there was something in the air that bothered her, a scent that had nothing to do with the usual marketplace smells. A faint, olfactor. I think they need to do something about their drains, though. But then the wind changed and carried the scent away, and she thought nothing more of it. The three of them walked into the marketplace. Under the walls, Gabrielle glanced up, catching the sight of some small, round, brown objects nailed up high on the stone of the walls. It was hard to see what they were. The sun was running high and got in her eyes. Xena, meanwhile, was also sniffing in the air. Someone's roasting venison again. I thought you said you had enough of that last night. That was then. Besides, we missed breakfast. Here's our chance to catch up. The cook butcher's stall was right under the walls. They paused there, and Gabrielle looked up again, now that they were in shadow. Oh, she said and gulped. Xena looked up too. The brown, dried up looking things were the nailed up heads of men. Above them, a few ravens sat on the battlements, looking bored, possibly because just about everything that could have been picked out of or off of those heads had been in the remaining flesh, and sinew was now much too dry to be appetizing. Xena raised her eyebrows and turned her attention back to the venison roasting on the butcher's spits. When Demas said they were keen on law enforcement around here, Xena muttered, she wasn't joking. Well, Gabriel said, we can at least do some shopping. Yes, Xena said, but I don't see any reason for us to linger. Once we've stocked up on supplies, we can head right out again. Gabriel nodded and turned her attention to shopping. The eternal nut bread had been getting boring lately, and here the variety of breads was surprisingly good. probably because of the plentiful firewood that the forest afforded. She went over to the bread stall and picked up a number of flat olive oil loaves and some salted biscuit, and then moved on again to dicker with a neighboring stall holder for some dried meat. Suddenly Xena appeared at her elbow again, finishing the last piece of spitted venison. "Gabrielle," she said under her breath, "have you seen Joxer?" At that Gabriel's eyes widened. She had been so enjoying the peace and quiet, which meant he wasn't bothering her, that she had forgotten that his not bothering her meant. "Oh no," she said. "Oh yes," said Xena. "I swear you take your eyes off him for a second. Finish up there. Then let's find him and get out of here." Jasper had swiftly become bored with the marketplace. When he when you got down to it, one village market was a lot like every other: meat, bread, beans, oil, wine, cloth, pots, and pans. He had enough food for his own purposes at the moment, and besides, the structure and the architecture of the castle was much more interesting to him. He walked under the walls for a little while, admiring the stone. It had apparently been brought some distance, as there was no stone like this in the neighborhood, and the way it had been mortared together. In front of the castle gates he stood for some minutes, admiring the gateway itself, a pair of high granite pillars bound in gilded iron, with a massive capstone around which the upper level of the wall had been built. The heads hanging to either side of it had apparently been there for some time. Well, whatever they did, they probably deserved it. A young woman came striding out of the gates with a basket over her arm. She was well dressed, tall and slender, with long chestnut hair hanging down her back over various layers of bright, gauzy muslin tunics, skirts, and vests in varying shades of russet, orange, and red. Her, fame, her face was beautiful in a severe, classical sort of way, high cheekboned, with slanting gray eyes, yet also weary, almost sorrowful. Joxer stood there transfixed. "Will you look at her?" he thought. "What a beauty! A high-class servant of some kind. But why is she so sad?" He broke off the stare as she caught sight of him, looked him over, and then walked over to him. "You're not from around here," she said. No. "Who are you?" The tone of voice was not of a servant, however. High class. Stall, said something in the back of his mind, a voice suddenly very imperative. "I am, the unknown hero," Joshua said. He paused and then added, "also called the Magnificent." The princess looked him over skeptically. "And of what precisely does your magnificence consist?" It's supposed to be self-evident." He suppressed a sigh, for it seemed it rarely was. He could hear footsteps coming up behind him and glanced over his shoulder. Yes, as he had thought it. It was Gabrielle and Xena at exactly the wrong moment. The princess raised her perfect eyebrows. "Many heroes," she said, "have passed through our golden gates before now, but few have made such a poor show as this." She looked over at his shoulders his shoulder at Xena and Gabriel. These are your attendants? Not really. Not really, Xena said, very slowly in a way that made Joxer twitch. This is Xena, Joxer said hurriedly, and the valiant Gabrielle. The princess's eyes widened, though only marginally. Oh no, of the noble warrior princess, she said, bowing slightly to Xena, and you and Gabrielle shall be made very welcome in youthlands, she said to Joxer. You are come to sue for our hand? Our? Joxer looked around him. Is there more than one of you? The princess gave him a dirty look. We are the only daughter of King Ananias, she said. Hippodamia. Hippodamia. Are we? Joshua said. Ah, he was trying to figure out what had gone wrong with the pronouns around here. So are you here to ask my father for my hand or what? Said the princess. Joshua said, well, now that you mention it, I wasn't sure that I was adequate for my radiant glory. Yes, that's what they all say. Let's just say, let's just get it over with, the princess said, arrogantly enough. But to Joxer's ears there still seemed to be a touch of weariness underlying the arrogance. She led them through the castle gates and into the palace. Xena, having seen palaces enough in her day, was plainly not overly impressed. Gabrielle was glancing around her with a dubious expression. Doctor could understand why, for as he looked at the columns and tapestries they passed, he got the feeling that this place might have been seen better days. It had a slightly seedy look about it, and the servitors' robes had a much mended look about them that was not well concealed. One of them passing by caught Joxer's attention. This was a young man, fair-haired, well-built, in rather threadbare robes, and he did not so much walk by his skulk by, but as he did, he glanced up at Joxer and favored him with an expression of purest rage. Just a flicker of it, and then the man was moving away, head down, hurrying. Joxer blinked as he walked along behind the princess. Why should he hate me? Haven't done anything to him. The central hall of the palace was not very big, but it was a little better kept than the antechamber through which they had passed. At the near end of it was a faint quacking noise which proved to come from several nervous-looking musicians playing shawms and other odd-looking wind instruments. Down at the other end stood a small cluster of men, surrounding a tall chair and partially hiding it. Father, the princess said. The 5 or 6 men standing there parted left and right, bowing to reveal the short, broad-shouldered man who sat in the chair. He was not crowned, and he was wearing clothes that were like enough to those of his subjects out in the marketplace, a belted gray tunic gray cross-gaitered breeches, and sturdy sandals, but the face held royalty enough, of a rather harsh kind, with an edge of cruelty to it, eyes at a slight slant like his daughter's, but steely, and a mouth that showed no signs of having smiled in a long time. Josser bowed. "Here's a man who has come to ask for my hand," Princess Hippodamia said. Josser straightened up. It's a very nice idea. What is his name?" said the king in a deep, mellow voice. This time Josser was ready. "I am the unknown hero," he said, "and this is the warrior princess Xena and her companion Gabrielle. In the meantime, You honor us with your presence, noble Xena," said the king, standing up. "And you, Gabrielle. Meanwhile, young man, I am sure that, having come here and asking what you ask, you know our law. Once you have set foot in my halls, I have the right to ask you to solve a riddle. Once you solve it, my daughter is yours. Should you fail to solve it, however, your head is forfeit and will be nailed up on the walls as a warning to others." Joxer went hot and cold with panic. They probably deserved what happened to them, he thought. "Oh, wonderful." He swallowed and started to say, "Excuse me, I don't want her and I was just leaving." But instead the words came out as, "King, is it not only the law that a man so challenged may in turn ask you or your daughter a riddle, which you must first answer before asking your own? And if you cannot answer, that man may go free and demand one boon of you?" Xena and Gabriel stared at each other. Joxer would have stared at himself if he could have. King Ananias blenched. "Someone told you that," he hissed. "Who told you about that?" It's like, Aphrodite's up to her tricks. The musicians playing the wind instruments down at the other end of the hall squeaked and bleated to an abrupt halt, and a terrible silence fell. Drouser swallowed again, unwillingly to answer the question directly. Fortunately, he didn't have to, for the king's attention was immediately distracted by the courtiers and counselors standing all around him, who were looking in every possible direction except at him. "Which of you traitors told him?" cried the king. The most senior of the counselors, a distinguished looking man with a long gray beard, turned to face the king then. Sire," he said, "this man has only just now arrived. As you know, none of us have had a chance to speak so much as a word to him, and your people, knowing the law, would not dare. They know very well the price they would pay and how it would be enforced." The king subsided somewhat. "Very well," he muttered, glancing at his daughter. "It is the law. Ask your riddle." "You must guess my name," Joxer said. Or rather, the voice inside him said, using his throat. "By tomorrow morning." The king glanced at Xena and Gabriel. Joxer watched the look Xena gave King Ananias, level, thoughtful, with just a hint of threat. Joxer was glad to see that, for it was occurring to him that what he had just said would be all too likely to put Xena in danger and Gabriel. He was opening his mouth to tell the two of them to get out of there, that this was his mission, and he would see them in the morning. But before he could, the king said, "Very well, Chamberlain." He turned to one of the men standing nearby who bowed very low. "See these guests to rooms befitting their station in the morning," he said to Joxer. "My daughter will give you the answer to your riddle. Then you must answer hers, or die, by the time the sun reaches noon." "Fine," Joxer somehow managed to say. The voice that had spoken through him had left him on his own as suddenly as it had come. "Oh, and would it be possible to get some lunch?" "See to it," said the king, and waved them away. As they went, Joxer shouldered close to Xena and whispered, "You should get out of here." "Just when things are getting interesting?" Xena said, apparently not caring who heard. "Not a chance. We're with you, hero." Joxer gulped and followed their escort. For Gabrielle, it was a very particular afternoon, partly because when lunchtime came, she had to keep reminding herself not to call Joxer by his name, as the three of them feasted at the king's table. The king was not there, having said that he had business to attend to. "Finding out the hero's name, probably," she muttered to Xena, while they watched Joxer put away the better part of a leg of mutton with a cheerful concentration all too reminiscent of that of a condemned man. "All they have to do is go to Tyke for that," Xena said under her breath. "Except except what?" "Remember the lady we met earlier?" Xena said, more quietly still. "I don't think it's going to be that easy for them." Gabrielle thought about that for a moment. "I hope you're right," she said. "Trouble was, it was no use depending on the gods for anything. Their caprice would betray your expectations at a moment's notice." They ate their lunch and took advantage of the castle's facilities for a bath. Neither of them saw much of Joxer that day. He was walking around the place, looking it over with the air of someone spying out of the strengths and weaknesses of a fortress to which he was about to lay siege. His seeming insouciance began to pry on Gabriel's mind as afternoon slid into evening, and evening into night. There was another festal table set out of them, set out for them to at dinner, a cold buffet, and various of King Anamas's courtiers met them there, all courtesy with insinuating questions about their travels, which Gabrielle parried as gracefully as she could. Xena had her reputation and her temper to shield her. No one bothered her more than once, after she had turned that flashing, feral smile on them and told them to mind their own business before she made them hers. Joxer, meanwhile, answered every question anyone asked him except those pertaining to his own recent whereabouts. For though somehow he always had his mouth hilariously full, and the answers came out garbled, past recognition. Finally, the courtiers, making fastidious faces, gave up on him and left the three of them alone, and servants came in and began quenching all but a few torches. Xena herself seemed to have become rather fed up with the proceedings, and she stood up and stretched. It's been a rather odd day, she said. I think I'll turn in. Wait for me, Gabriel said. Good night, hero. Night, Joxer said, not budging, but rather addressing himself straight away to another piece of cold mutton. The two of them headed up the stairs in one corner of the keep's tower toward the room they had been given. Come here. Okay, come here. Come here. There's a little break. Here's a little break. Yeah. I'm getting a little breather here. Oh, you want to read with me? Benefit in their state. Wait a minute. Where was I? The two of them headed up the stairs in one corner of the keeper's tower toward the room they had been given, befitting their station in this part of the world apparently meant fairly palatial. The couches were cushioned in silk, and the room was scattered with beeskin rugs. But again, everything had that slightly tatty look. Xena sat down on one of the couches and started taking her greaves off. Gabrielle put her satchel aside and then glanced around. Come here, come here, come here. She crosses her feet, so nice, like a little lady. What? Xena said. I left my downstairs. I left my staff downstairs. Oh, leave it. No one's going to steal it. No, I guess not. Gabrielle sat down on her own couch, then stood up again. What? I'd just like to know where it is. Xena shrugged. Gabrielle slipped out, eased the door shut, and stood still long enough to let her eyes get used to the reduced light. There was only one or two torches burning down in the keep's main hall now, and none in the corridor. When her eyes adjusted, she made her way cautiously down these steps. Then, just inside the doorway, she kept stopped voices. She peered around the door jam. Dogster was still sitting at the table, and standing across it from him, looking down at him, was Princess Hippodamia. Hippodamia. I don't know what it is about you, the princess was saying, but you're not much like my other suitors somehow. Gabrielle, overhearing this, had trouble controlling her laughter, but she managed it. No, Joshua said, with the calm of complete self-assurance on this count anyway. I'm unique. The princesses shifted in an easy movement. Look, she said, I wish you'd give this up and leave. The result is so predictable. I wouldn't say that, Joshua said. I'm willing to take my chances, especially since you have a result to produce too. There was a brief silence at his boldness. Gabrielle wondered, or because she really isn't sure she's going to be able to find out who he is. And when I do, the princess said, then if I can't answer your question, Joshua said, you get to nail my head up. It's not me, the princess said, sounding upset for the first time. Everybody thinks that. You sure haven't done much to try to change their minds, Joshua said. You don't know my father, the princess muttered. He says he loves me. He says he only wants the best for me. This is best for you, Joshua said, chopping off all the neighboring princes' heads and nailing them up to the walls. Kind of an unusual concept of good parenting, isn't it? Gabriel's eyebrows went up at the sharpness of his tone. The princess said, there's more to it than that. When my mother died, she trailed off, her voice suddenly full of old pain. There was a pause. Finally, Joshua said, he really loved her, didn't he? He did. And I didn't suppose he was entirely happy to be left alone with a baby daughter, who he felt had killed his wife, said the princess. No, you could say he would have been pretty ambivalent about that. There was a much longer silence. But you were all he had of her, Joshua said. And when you grew up and getting you married started to be an issue. It's still a tradition here that a father gets to set the conditions under which his daughter marries, the princess said. My father simply seems to have set the conditions rather high. She shook her head for his talk about how much he loves me, though. He never once asked me what I wanted to do. But then he never asked me what I want about anything. They both sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Joxer said, what happens when I win? You won't, the princess said. Joxer laughed. Then I'd better pick my best side, he said, so your father can nail me up with that one facing out. Come on, girl. Yeah, yeah. Come on, girl. Come on. Come on. Let's take a breather for a little bit. Got like 18 pages left. Hey, girl. Hey, girl. What? What? Okay. Oh, oh, pretty girl. And what happens afterward? When that blonde guy I saw skulking around here finally gets up his courage to, no, the princess cried and leapt to her feet. She stared at him like someone who had just taken an arrow through the heart. No, you can't. No, you. She fled. Joxer. Oh, Kitty. Okay, okay, okay. Houdini, you want back on the bed? Okay, okay, okay. Joxer stared after her from her place of concealment. So did Gabriel. Joxer stood up, then, wearing a most thoughtful expression, and made for the stairway on the other side of the hall, the one leading to his own room. Gabriel watched him go. After a short wait to make sure that the coast was clear, she made her way back to the room she and Xena had been given, and found Xena sitting in front of the fire, sharpening her chakram thoughtfully on a whetstone. Xena glanced up. Gabriel, your staff was right there in the corner, where you left it. Oh, Gabriel said, yes. Where have you been? Gabriel told her. When she was finished, Xena raised her eyebrows and went back to grooming the chakram's edge. You'll have noticed that this palace is beginning to fall on hard times, Xena said softly. Yes, word has certainly gotten out about how the king treats his daughter's suitors. The royal line will die out, and the kingdom will be annexed by one of the other neighboring kingdoms. Doesn't he realize what he's doing? Gabriel said. He's destroying the place himself, as surely as if he'd set fire to it. He may realize, Xena said. He may not. Sometimes it's hard when you're in the middle of your pain to understand all the ramifications of what you're doing. She felt silent. She fell silent. And Jay and the hero, yes, Xena said, sounding thoughtful, sat down. What can we do to help him? Right now, the whetstone went against the chakram. Probably nothing but wait. In an upper room of the palace, Hippodamia and her father, the king, were waiting for the messenger. Hippodamia was pacing. Her father was calm. It's nothing to worry about, King Ananias said. Calm yourself, daughter. Everything will be fine. I had hoped it was all over, the princess said softly, pausing to look out the window. It had been so long since anyone came. I thought it had finally stopped. It seems not. Well, never mind. We'll soon be rid of this one too. She turned to her father. Should not She turned so that her father should not see her face. At the same moment, someone knocked on her father's Enter, chamber door. Enter, said the king. The door opened just enough for the messenger to come in, and then shut behind him with a thump. The little man stood there in his dark night traveling clothes, looking distantly nervous. Well, the king said, I rode to Chaptite village, just as you said, sir. And what's his name then? The man fell to his knees. The princess stared. Please, sire, the villagers, they must have heard his name when the three of them were there. What's his name? Sire, the shaking manager said, they've forgotten. The king stood up slowly and began advancing on the man. What did you say? Truly, sire, they were so impressed with Xena and Gabriel. They're so famous that they paid hardly any attention to this nobody. None of them had ever heard of this fellow, after all, and he mentioned his name once or twice, but none of them can remember it now. He seemed like such an ordinary type. The princess stood there, blinking with surprise at her as her father grabbed the messenger and shook him as a dog shakes a rat. You're lying! They're lying! I'll have all their heads. No, sir, truly, they wouldn't lie. They know your law too well for that. And anyway, I know them all. They wouldn't lie to me. And truly, on my oath, they don't remember his name. The king knew, threw the messenger to one side and stalked back to his chair, hurling himself into it, and sat there with his head in his hands. No time to send any messenger any further. The night is running. There must be something we can do. Otherwise, this nobody, this unknown hero, is going to be able to do anything he wants with you. Father, Hippodamia said, moving to him. She bent over him but put her hands on his shoulders. Father, leave the problem with me. Aren't you always telling me how wise I am? Let me handle it. He sat there with his head in his hands a while more, and then turned his face up to her, a hard face, trusting and afraid. All right, he said. She went to get the pitcher that held his wine, and lingered a little longer than strictly necessary at the sideboard, over the business of pouring out a cup of it for him. She had half suspected something like this might happen, and once the hero had refused to leave, she had come prepared. Here, father, Hippodamia said, coming back to him with the cup. Drink this. Then come, then get some rest. Everything will be all right in the morning. He drank the cup off at one draught, and sighed, she would have sighed with relief if she dared. She lived in fear that one day he would detect the taste of what she'd slipped into the wine from the hollow inside her pendant. Go on now, she said, and motioned with her head to the messenger to get out of there. She helped her father out of the chair and pushed him gently in the direction of his couch. Go on, sleep, and leave everything to me. He lay down on the couch, quiet. Shortly he was snoring. A few moments later, Hippodamia slipped out of his chamber and shut the door behind her. The first quarter moon was riding high in an utterly clear sky, one bereft of the usual summer haze, and more indigo than black. Stars seemed to swarm in it like bees, more of them visible every time one looked at a specific part of the heavens, and the whole landscape spread out under Joker's window. The forest and the hills beyond was unnaturally luminous with starlight and moonlight. Joxer couldn't sleep. It was too warm, and there were things on his mind. Finally, he got up, made his way out of the castle, kept nodding at the door guards, and began to walk around the keep in the warm summer night. He started to hum, then stopped himself. There are other things to think about, like what I'm going to ask for, what I'm going to ask her tomorrow morning, assuming that things go my way. He had no idea whether they would or not. It was useful to know what you had, that you had a goddess on your side, but goddesses were inscrutable and sometimes changed their minds for fun. And what would he do then? Suppose they do find out my name. Joxer gulped, but then he tried to hold himself straight and brave, as if it didn't matter. This lasted about 5 seconds. I'm too young to die. Then again, since when is this a mere minimum age for dying? Here or anywhere else? His mouth set grimly. I may be committing suicide here. He paused, looking up at the castle keep. The window opening above him was the one opposite his in the tower, Gabrielle's bedroom window. There was a light there. She was awake too. Worrying about me, said one part of his mind, hopeful. Not a chance, said another, or more accurately, not in the way you wish she was worrying. You know better than that. Her heart is elsewhere. Joxer breathed in and breathed out, hope departing light as a butterfly on the breath, and leaving him sad and suddenly resolute. If I'm going to be dead of this adventure in the morning, he thought, why not? What have I got to lose? And if I don't tell her now, I'll never have another chance. He started to sing. On her couch in the near darkness, Gabrielle heard the voice from outside the tower and rolled over and buried her face in her arms. Oh no, she muttered. Joxer had plainly forgotten about his promise. No one's sleeping. She heard Joxer sing, none are sleeping, not even you, my princess. Up there in your chilly bedroom, look out to see how the blessed stars are trembling with love and longing. Gabriel had expected to be holding her ears by now, but to her utter surprise, in the middle of practically the first stanza, something unheard of started to happen to his voice. It acquired a shape, and the notes Joxer hit, true ones for once, acquired depth and power. The voice grew across the room. Xena glanced up from her seat by the slowly dying fire, a brooding look in her eyes. Gabrielle caught the musing glance, flinched from it, looked out the window again, unable to make out the figure that sang. But oh, my mysteries locked inside, my mysteries no one else will learn but you, and to your lips alone. And I reveal it when dawn's rose splendor lights the sky. All All around them in the castle, Gabriel suspected that people were sitting up in their beds, wondering what had awakened them, and wondered who in the world had a voice like that. In the world, indeed, Gabriel thought, feeling, even for a man's voice like that, a most unaccustomed twinge of envy. The voice paused, then went soft again, musing, and it was as if the whole light leaned in close to listen. Yes, it's my kiss. Will finally break the silence and make your heart mine. From somewhere nearby, Gabrielle thought she heard a somehow familiar woman's voice, in sweet and rather stingy desperation, singing in response. The hero's secret no one knows, yet oh, the hero's death is surely near. But the voice that was suddenly Joxer's, if it heard this, was not concerned. It pealed out in growing triumph and anticipation. Oh, hasten hence now! Only night and set stars swiftly set, for my love will con the dawn, con the dawn, come the dawn. Summer thunder flickered along the horizon like muted drums and faded. In another room in the palace, the young woman stood by the window, listening with all of her being. I never knew, Epidemia. Epidemia thought, I never knew this is what they felt like. She thought about the walls. She had stopped counting the heads a long time ago, had learned not to pay any attention to the suitors, their longing locks, their rich presence, because she knew what was going to happen to them. There was no moving her father, no hope of changing his mind. She knew what was still foremost in it, even after all these years, the memory of her mother, the queen, dying in the agonies of childbirth. A long time ago now, but that memory was still fresh for him. And every time he looks at me, he sees me married, and then, after 9 months or so, dying the same way. The screams echoing down these empty halls. Sometimes she suspected he still heard them through all the chatter of his courtiers, the squawk of the musicians he hired and fired and hired and fired again, because none of them could drown that sound out. He loves me so much that he would do anything to protect me from that, even kill them all, one after another. She had been telling herself for a long time that there was nothing she could do to stop it. Yet now, terribly, she wondered. Hippodamia began to tremble at the thought of Enemies, at the thought of Ivanus, who had been here for nearly 2 years now, hiding, pretending to be a servant, and doing the most menial tasks to be near her, things that she had been utterly alien to his princely blood. She had not betrayed him, that would have been her death, but neither had she allowed Venus to do what he so much wanted to do. Come forward, take the challenge, meet the dare, for that would have lost him his life as well. Nor had she even ever dared to tell him the part of the law that this unknown hero had somehow discovered. The chance of something going wrong, of losing him, was too terrible to contemplate. At least at the moment, the two of them could catch the occasional furtive glimpse of each other during the humdrum palace day, but Evenus could never have the freedom to sing to her the way this hero did, though the same thoughts, almost the same words, must surely beat every night in his breast. Loving me is a death sentence, and we are imprisoned together. But never until tonight was there been a way out of jail. And Venice had at last heard the loophole in the law. Now, not from her, for her father had made her swear by the gods never to tell, but from her father's own lips. Now he could challenge her father and maybe even win. Then they could be together openly at last, and the killing would finally be over. Finally, oh gods, over at last. But there was still this nameless hero. And what if he should win her? She would, she would have to leave her hidden prince and go to some strange country and would never see him again. No, Hippodamia thought, suddenly fiercely resolute. Once and for all it ends here, and I will not let this hero out of nowhere ruin everything when a way out for a Venus and me has finally become plain. She sat very still, clenching her mind around a growing plan, as she might clench a fist around a knife. Then Hippodamia got up and went to the door, opened uh, opened it, looked down the hallway, and called the guards. It was almost dark in the room. Only the fire left, burned down to embers, and one little oil lamp on the nearby table. Sleepless on her couch, Gabrielle stared at it. That voice and the words it had sung. That voice. It had been the kind of voice that sounded like it had been in training for a lifetime, and it wrapped itself around your heart and squeezed until you were breathless with longing. She had always known perfectly well what a hopeless case Joxer was, but this voice had nothing to do with that hopelessness. And her memory said, I fear the gods even when they bear gifts. Orpheus must have sounded like that, Gabriel thought, down there in the underworld, singing before the throne of Hades for the return of Eurydice. No one could possibly refuse him anything. It's not fair. You trained for half a life working hard to have some kind of voice. And then someone comes along with a god as a backup and sounds like that after a single night. She had to resist the urge to get up, go on down Aphrodite, wherever she was, and administer a good, swift kick to her divine butt. Yet at the same time, Joxer seemed to be manifesting signs of being seriously interested in someone else. This by itself was a good thing, and to be encouraged. I should be relieved, Gabriel thought. All the same, it was weird. Very strange to have that endless, annoying regard suddenly diverted from her. It was enough to make Gabrielle twitch a little bit, enough to make her jealous. Oh, gods, no. But all the same, as Gabrielle twisted and turned on her couch, she had to wonder what was the matter with her. There was no question that this princess was absolutely no good for him, but Joxer deserved much better, especially as she's likely to have his head nailed up on the walls by tomorrow afternoon. But was that just a rationalization? Am I thinking that because even though he and I can never be lovers, I still want to keep him to myself because it would be too much a wound to my pride if all of a sudden he ran off after some princess? She made a face. And why wouldn't she? Why do I have what do I have to offer him compared to a princess? Not cutting his head off for one thing, and another part of her mind unusually sarcastically. Across the room there was a soft sigh as Xena shifted in her sleep. She had dozed off in the chair, and Gabrielle had seen no need to move her. Indeed, she had been too distracted. As the moon slid down the sky and the echoes of that voice rang in her mind and refused to fade. And then the heard, and then she heard a sound that was one of those echoes, nor was it anything to do with Xena. A soft scrape outside outside the door, faintly through a crack between the boards of the door. She saw a glimmer of light. Ah, oh, oh, oh no. Ha ha ha. I'm sorry, everyone. Oh, a soft scrape outside the door finally. Through a crack between the boards of the door, saw a glimmer of light. Xena, she whispered, and got up, feeling around her. A moment later, the door swung open. It had been locked from the inside. Gabriel looked hastily away from the lamp, between carried in by one of the palace guards, caught sight of the gleam of eyes, bless you, behind the door, and stood up straight, holding her staff. Behind the guard, followed by another one, Princess Hippodamia came in. The guards were carrying drawn swords, The princess paused, looked around her. Where is she? What are you doing here? Gabriel said. I've come to ask you a question. You might have come a little earlier, Gabriel said. Not for this, said the princess. Tell me now, and no harm will come to you. What is his name? Gabriel grinned, shook her head. You're asking the wrong person. I think not. Take her, the princess said to her guards. They stepped forward. I think the door swung back. Xena was there, wide awake, reaching behind her. Think again, Xena said. The princess turned, as if not surprised, as if still resolute. The guards looked from Gabriel to Xena. You think, said the princess, and save us all trouble. You two have been traveling with him. You must know his name. We are not a poor land. Not just yet. We have gold enough to give you to make the one word worth your while. And you seriously believe, Sina said, that having been approached like this by you, that we would tell you? She laughed, and in her hand the, the chakram flashed in the lamplight. Or that we would betray our friend? Gold you may have in plenty here, but brains are clearly in short supply. The princess's face went dark from anger, and she looked at the guards. The guards looked like they would much rather be somewhere else. Now, the princess said. The guards turned away from Xena, leaped toward Gabrielle. But Gabrielle's staff was already in her hands, and the guards' attack was half-hearted, fragmented. They got in one another's way. A moment later, one of them was on the floor, curled up like a poked bug, retching and holding his crotch. Gabriel fainted, thrust with the staff at the second guard's head, then took the staff two-handed and drove it straight down into the second guard's instep. He howled and fell over sideways. Gabriel stood up straight again and watched the two men fight for floor space in which to writhe in agony. She shook her head. You were right, she said. They almost never armor the feet properly, do they? When they do, they have to walk like ducks, Xena said mildly, putting the chocolate away. And men hate walking like ducks. She looked up at the Hippodamia. Princess, she said, go away, don't bother us again. We'll send these poor creatures back downstairs when they're recovered. Meanwhile, if I were you, I'd start deciding what you're going to do when you can't answer the hero's riddle in the morning. Hippodamia, now pale with rage and possibly with fear, vanished. Come on, you, Gabriel said, bending over the guard whose foot she had crushed. Come on, get up. I've got something you can put on that. Xena was meanwhile hoisting the other poor guard up onto her couch on his back. You always amaze me, she said. How? When you insist on patching these creatures up Afterward, it's not their fault, Gabriel said. They're only doing their jobs. Give me my satchel. Give me my satchel? Xena made an exasperated face. She got up, but first she went to the window and listened. But that remarkable voice had long since fallen silent. Now I wonder, she said, turning back to get Gabriel's satchel, just where he is. Just where is he is. Worried, Gabriel looked up from getting the man's sandal off to look out the window. Yes, she thought sadly. I wonder too. In the darkness of the main hall, Joxer sat by what was left of the fire in the big hearth. He was a shadow among shadows, but all the same, when one more shadow moved, he noticed it. Hold it right there, he said. I have a sword and I'm not afraid to use it. I dare say you're not. I dare say you're not, said the darkness in a voice sharp as bright bronze but very quiet, a man's voice. Joxer nodded. His head was on the sword's hilt, but not in any position that would make for an effective draw. He knew this, and he was sure the one who was watching it would know it too. Come closer, he said. The shadow moved. Become a shadow in long thread in long threadbare robes with a hood. Joxer had been sitting in this near darkness long enough to see the glint of blonde hair under the hood and the gleam of eyes. What do you want? Joshua said. I'll help you escape. Why? I heard you sing. The bright voice was silently dulled. And do you think that someone with a voice like that shouldn't die, wouldn't die, shouldn't die so young? Joshua said. The other hesitated, hearing the ironic tone in Joxer's voice, probably unwillingly to agree to the lie. Joshua smiled, a small, grim smile, and shook his head. I'm not going anywhere, he said. There's something to do here first. You love her. Joshua swallowed. Joxer swallowed. By rights, he should have been afraid. Alone with this man who was desperate, who might do anything. But to his surprise, fear was far from his heart. It was too full of other things. It's not what you think. You're crazy. Do you expect me to believe you? I heard you. I heard how you sang. Joxer shook his head. You heard what I was singing. All right, but not who I was singing to. If you hurry, the man said, I can still get you out of here. Joxer laughed softly. I'm not that many oars short of a trireme, buddy. There are no guards on the palace doors, and none on the gates outside. I could leave any time. Come to think of it, so could you. I can't, the man said. His voice was suddenly terrible, desperate. It's her you can't leave, Joshua said. You think I don't know the signs? Do you think I don't know how it is to want someone and know you'll never be able to have them unless a miracle happens? He swallowed. He was finding this hard, but it had to be done. It is about to happen, the man said, but not to me. In the morning, they still will not know your name, and he will be yours, and she will be yours. What if she were to be left free to ask someone else her riddle? Doctor said. A pause at that. The sound of breath sharply instaken. Then the man said, "It wouldn't matter. No one has ever answered it correctly." Oh, what is it? The riddle is, what is the one thing that all women want? Joxer frowned. Yes, he said after a moment. I could see where that one would be a real poser. It was hard enough figuring out what just one woman wanted. So you see, it does not matter, and it does not alter what will happen. She will be yours in the morning. Better I should be dead before then, or better that you should. There was the soft sound of a sword being drawn. Joshua should have at least started to become nervous, but somehow it didn't happen. I swear by the gods, Joshua said with abruptly clarity, that the room sang, that the room rang with it, by mighty Aphrodite herself, that I do not love your princess. Silence. But in the morning, the man said softly, she will still be yours. Joshua shook his head, gazing for a moment into the fire. Don't bet on it, he said softly. Besides, just look at the word yours. Just look at the word yours. As if people can own each other like slaves. It's not owning that special other that that you want. If you're really in love, you want them to have what they really want and to get to be with them at the same time, but the two don't always coincide. He sighed. All you can hope for is that at the right time you think of the right thing to say. Hey, girl. He looked back at the gleam of eyes under the hood. Wait till morning, Joshua said. See what happens. He paused. And you might pray. A little prayer never hurts. A pause, and then the sound of a sword going back into its sheath, uncertain, almost reluctant. The gods, the man said, bleak voiced, are capricious and cruel. Not all of them, Joshua said. Not all the time. And even when they are, what use are human beings if we can't give them a good example and try to teach them manners? Silence the man's gaze lingered on Silent the man's gaze lingered on Joxer a little longer. Then he turned, faded into the shadows, was gone. Joxer sat and stared into the fire again, wishing he felt as certain as his words had sounded. For outside, pallid and uncertain, the night was shading into the morning twilight that would lead to dawn. You chill down. You chill down. We're almost finished. There you go, my little girl. There you go, my little girl. Yeah, she's a good one, isn't she? Okay, you did not move. People began gathering in the hall as soon as it started to get really light, about an hour before dawn. Someone from the kitchen stopped by his seat by the fire and pressed a cup of hot wine into Joxer's hand. He drank it gratefully, for the place had become very chilly overnight. Slowly, more and more people gathered. There was as as the light grew, and finally he saw Xena and Gabrielle move through the crowd and take a stand near him. Gabrielle seemed to be having trouble looking at him. It was reciprocal. Joxer had got very interested in the last of his wine. Xena, though, slipped over to stand by his chair and said quietly, "How's your throat?" "Sore. I think I'm catching cold." She gave him an ironic smile, which suggested immediately to Joxer that if that was all that had happened to him this morning, he would be lucky. "We had some visitors last night," Xena said. "Your princess and a couple of guards." "My princess?" Joshua smiled, but not with humor. "What happened?" "Gabrielle dealt with them." Josh's eyes widened. "She wasn't in the best of moods last night," Xena said. "Something she ate?" Joxer said innocently. "Innocent." Xena smiled and stepped back to stand with Gabrielle, away toward the rear of the hall. Trumpets bleated a slightly off-key fanfare. Joxer got up from his chair. "Well," he said, "let's go." He and Xena and Gabrielle and all the various courtiers and counselors and a whole crowd of townspeople who seemed to have appeared from somewhere made their way down to the king's throne at the end of the hall. King Ananias was sitting there, looking slightly hungover and very depressed, and by his throne stood his daughter in magnificent robes of silver and white, and the flame-colored veil of a bride-to-be. Her face was as still as a statue's, and expressionless. Only her eyes dwelt on Joxer with dull fear. Joxer took up when he hoped was a stately pose before the throne. There was some snickers from the crowd behind him. He ignored them. "King," he said yesterday. He said, "Yesterday, in accordance with your law, I asked you a riddle. Now you must answer it. What is my name? The king looked at his daughter. Princess Hippodamia looked down at him with a flicker of grief in her eyes and shook her head. Then she looked up. We do not know, she said. Joshua stood up tall. I, he said, am Joxer the Magnificent. The king looked at his daughter, and Hippodamia looked at him, and then, along with everybody else in the crowd, they shook their heads. Never heard of him. And the king Joxer sighed. But that's of no account, the king said, his voice heavy with defeat. By our law, I must now grant you whatever boon you ask. So ask your boon. Jocer saw the princess go even paler than she had been, and as had not happened until now. For just a moment, the possibility hung burning before him, clear and real within his grasp. Marry the princess, settle down, eventually become a king. Then Joxer breathed out. This was not a fairy tale. This was real life. And his heart was bestowed elsewhere. Meanwhile, he hated to hurt Hippodamia, even fleetingly, but he saw all too distantly what had to be done here. He took a deep breath. I want this man to answer the princess's riddle, Doctor said, and he pointed at what seemed to be a servant standing off to one side in shabby brown robes, a fair-haired, well-built man who stood straight and tall, wearing the fiercely hopeless face of a man who is about to die, and knows he can do nothing about it. The man came forward. Who are you? The king said, while Princess Hippodamia stood there, trembling and pale. I am Ivanus, Prince of Arcaria, he said, and I come to sue for the hand of the Princess Hippodamia. No! Hippodamia burst out. I told you not to. We agreed that you would never. There's no such thing as never, Joxer said. Sooner or later, everything ends. Were they his words or Aphrodite's? He couldn't tell. His heart was aching, as it had been for most of the day and night. But then it usually ached. One of the conditions he had become used to in life. Possibly this was why he was perfect for this job. He was already injured, inured to pain. I won't ask him, Hippodamia cried. The law is the law, daughter, said the king. Iron, iron in his voice, but also fear. You must ask him. Father, ask him. Hippodamia gulped, and then she whispered, what is the one thing that all women want? The courtiers stood, hushed, glancing at one another, shaking their heads. Prince Evenus stood straight and proud, and his face was uncertain. He swallowed convulsively, and then his eyes went wide. Their way, he said. Sudden astonishment, a great smile of joy, broke over Hippodamia's face. The king looked completely stunned. Is that the right answer? Joshua said. It is, the king whispered. A huge cheer went up from the surrounding courtiers and townspeople. It's not like that's not the one thing all men want too, whispered a voice in Joxer's mind. The one thing they had plainly whispered to Venus just now. But phrase the question this way, and men always get bogged down in the gender details and lose sight of the bigger issue. The prince cast off his worn robes and stood forth in the hither concealed rich garments of a noble man. He and Hippodamia flung themselves into one another's arms, and the king stood up from his throne, suddenly looking very lost and alone. You have beaten me, he said to Joxer as Xena and Gabrielle came up behind him. Not me, Joxer said. The gods. Maybe with a little help from me. And you might have a word with Aphrodite yourself. You can never tell what might happen. The king looked at him sadly, then stepped away and vanished up the stairs. Almost through. Almost through, girl. Now that you mention it, Xena said, have you seen Aphrodite recently? Joxer shook his head. Heard from her, he said. He turned to look at Hippodamia and Evanis just now breaking out of their clinch and said, I think she's been busy. The prince and princess, hand in hand, came over to them. How can we ever thank you? The prince said. Joshua immediately became flustered. Oh, think nothing of it. Thou now, though, now that you mention it, travel expenses, summer supplies. I will never forget you, Princess Hippodamia said. You won my heart and then won it again for another. She took Joxer's hand. You are truly a hero, though how you should be an unknown one, I will never understand. Oh, well, you know how it is, Joxer said, still more flustered. News doesn't always travel everywhere at the same speed. There is, however, a ballad. So I heard, Hippodamia said. It changed my life, and I will remember it always. She kissed the open mouthed Joxer on the cheek very softly, and then, hand in hand with Venice, she went away. The wedding happening the same day. The next morning, having caught up on their sleep, Xena and Gabriel and Joxer left King Enomaus in Nomaeus' castle, loaded down by Hippodamia and Evenus with as much as they could carry in the way of supplies and gifts, and a small but solid sum in gold. For the rest of the day they journeyed up out of the forest vale, and that night sheltered on a south-facing hillside under the trees, looking out over the sunset, green fields, and toward the southern plains. Gabriel sat up by the fire for a while with Joxer after Xena had rolled herself up in her bedroll and turned in. How was it? She said, having a voice like that. Having a voice like that. I don't know that I had it. And Joxer said rather somberly, as much as it had me. But it sounded the way I always sound in here. He tapped his head. Gabriel sighed. But when she looked up at him again, her expression was thoughtful. Maybe, she said, when we run into each other occasionally, that's something we could work on, getting the outside voice to sound more like the inside. He looked at her and realized that this was the best offer that she could make him. Not at all the one he desperately wanted, but the best. That would be nice, he said. Thanks. Gabriel sat silent for a while more. Then she said, You know I can't. He said silently, Yes, he said, I know. For your sake, Gabriel said, I could wish that things could be different, but he nodded, finding it difficult to speak. That still means a lot, he said just that. Gabriel nodded, then got up and went to her own bed roll, not so far from Zena's. Doctor sat there by the fire for a long time, watching it burn, when he suddenly heard a soft pop, like an ember, popping, followed by a brief sizzle of pink sparkles in the air. He did not look up immediately. You used me, he said softly, so as not to wake the others up. I was a tool. Most mortals are, Aphrodite said softly. And you know what? So are the gods sometimes. There's a power even above Zeus, a power that sits above Olympus in the clouds and darkness, moving even gods to and fro. Destiny. She shook her head. It's annoying having to put up with that kind of thing, but you know what? You'll get over it. We all do. Meanwhile, what was I supposed to do? I'm the goddess of love, for Christ's sake. Things were not going well here, and my rep was at stake. If the right tool comes along for the right job, should I just sit around and refuse to use it? She paused, looking at him. Besides, you didn't really want to stay there. You want. You know what I want, Doctor said more softly still. But it won't happen. Not without divine intervention. I mean, Gabriel and Xena, they. He fell silent. They're so close. There's no room for three. But all I want in the world is, Aphrodite said, you're going to have to work that out for yourself. He said, if I just give you what you want without you working for it, what would it be worth anymore? And anyway, do you think that force up there in the darkness isn't moving her around too? In ways even I can't temper with? I wish you luck. Her voice was compassionate. Meanwhile, maybe tool is the wrong word to use. Maybe you were more like a gift, if not to the one you wanted to be made a gift of. Well, but think how much good you did. Joxer thought about it. Yeah, he said, I guess. And he started to acquire a small smile. And after all, Joshua said, it's part of a hero's role to make heroic sacrifices, isn't it? There you are, Aphrodite said. What a clever mortal. Hold that thought. And meanwhile, she bent toward him. Nice work. And the goddess of love, just remember, never give up hope. She kissed Joxer lightly on the lips and vanished with little sparkling lights and in fragrance. And where she had been sitting, small white flowers lay on the ground. Joxer touched his mouth, wondering, then sat up and looked into the fire and threw another branch on it. No one's sleeping, he sang softly. No one's sleeping. Not with a voice like that singing. They won't, someone muttered on the other side of the fire. Joxer, shut up! Joxer shut up and smiled. Okay, Yay! Wow. Finally finished with that one. See? I'm finished with it. I'm finished with it. I'm going to put her with the rest of them. You're a pretty Houdini. I hope y'all enjoyed that chapter. That was long, but it was fun. It was informative. I'll say ciao for now. And Houdini says ciao. Mm, good night. And come next week for the next.